Good evening, everyone. How are we doing this evening? Beautiful back here, too. That's great. Thank you all so much for coming out to the performance this evening for Maryland Band Directors Band. On stage, we have a large group of fabulous musicians, some of whom are band directors in the Maryland area, Virginia. We have some ex-military members, and we have some students up here too. So we're glad to have a wide variety of fantastic musicians to deliver the performance this evening. My name is Daniel Orr. I'm the director for the Maryland Band Directors Band, and the program tonight is called Sacred and Profane. So we have gathered up several tunes that either have a diabolical feel, or if you want to go to the flip side and feel angelic, have a little bit of that flair. So the first piece that we're going to play, we're going to start with the good. We always start with the Jekyll, right? Is by Giovanni Gabriele, and his music has been regarded as some of the most representative, influential music of the Renaissance era. Gabriele would often, he wrote in multiple choirs, and he would often take advantage of large spaces like cathedrals or castles or whatever, and he would put these brass choirs in different locations in this large space, and they would produce kind of like an echo. The piece that we're going to play today is called Canzone Duodecimi Toni, which is it's originally written for two brass choirs, but since we don't have two brass choirs up here, we have woodwinds and brass. So the arranger instead uses them as contrasting timbres instead of this space to create a conversation between these two groups. So I hope this is a fascinating piece for everybody. And please enjoy Gabriele's Canzone Duo Sintoni Toni. enjoyed that. We're going to stay in the heavenly realm here, and we're going to play a piece by a newish piece written in 2023, I believe, by Grace Bauer Dunlop. She is a young composer that likes to compose memorable melodies to highlight emotional aspects of the human experience. In her program notes, she writes that this next piece encapsulates her thought process when she looks up at the night sky or across a beautiful landscape. These moments to her, as well as to all of us when we see those type of things, give us perspective. That our worries, that our problems in life are so little compared to the wide universe that we live in. And yet, there are part of the beauty of living and part of the human experience. The title of this work comes from a psalm, Psalm 8:3-4, which reads, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them." Here's Grace Bowers, "When I consider them." The next piece, we're going to go over the dark side a little bit. Although it's not really the dark side, it's just a disturbed dream that somebody's having. But let's talk about Hector Berlioz. So, unlike most composers of his time, Hector Berlioz was not a virtuoso or performer. He was trained by his father as a musician, but he actually went to school to be a physician in medicine. And it wasn't until later on in college and life that he decided that he wanted to go into music. And because of that, he never really had a lot of formal training until later in his life, but I guess he did like to study harmony books, which is kind of weird for a kid, right? To go harmony books, I don't know. Anyways, for Hector Berlioz, one of his most famous pieces is Symphonie Fantastique, which is a large 5-movement work so for your students in here, who knows what programmatic music is? Anyone know what program music is? Any guesses? I heard it was extra credit if someone knew. Oh, I'm sorry. No, didn't work. All right, you said you talked about it in your class, so okay, all right. Anyways, I'll tell you the answer. Programmatic music is just music that tells a story, that has a background, right? That tells a story. And this Symphonie Fantastique is a story of a gifted artist who, in the depths of hopelessness and despair, because of his unrequited love for a woman, has poisoned himself with opium. The symphony tells the story of the artist's drug-fueled hallucinations, and his love interest is represented by a theme which Berlioz calls the idée fixe, which is an idea that keeps coming back. And we don't play, we're only playing the 4th movement of that, which is March to the Scaffold, which I'll get to in a minute. So we don't play the full theme in this setting. We only play small pieces, but I would like you to hear the whole thing, because it is the theme that this whole work is based upon. So, okay, so we have our fine oboist, Deborah Layton, who's going to play the entire idée fixe for you. So that movement, that piece, or that idée fixe, is only played one time, and it's at the beginning, it's in the 1st movement. And you'll hear a portion of that at the end of this movement. So the fireworks really begin in the 4th movement here, March to the Scaffold. The artist, right, who's had too much opium, we've established that, has killed his beloved, is content, he's dreaming this. He has killed his beloved, is condemned to death, and is being marched to the scaffold for his beheading. And so it starts very soft, it's kind of off in the distance, like he's coming with all the people with the giant axes, right? So it starts softly ominous, and the hero actually calls out, and he wants to live. And that is represented by, in the entire piece, it's represented by the bassoon, ta-da, which is our bassoonist. Yeah, that's okay. Bassoon, yeah. And the cries out for forgiveness, but alas, he has killed his beloved. So a tumultuous arrival at the place of execution is suddenly interrupted by a soft, dreamy thought of his beloved, which is the ED feast, right? And without warning, though, the blade drops, the head falls, and the blaring fanfare of the winds and percussion announces the poet's demise. Or was it just bad drugs? I'll leave that for you all to decide. Here's Berlioz' March in the Sky.
Hi everyone, my name is Christian Bolden. I'm one of the directors of the Maryland Band Director Band. When Dan and I were first coming up with this program, I kind of told him this is the piece that, the next piece is the one that I kind of wanted the program to get kind of like the center of the program. It's called White Angels in the Architecture by Frank Tekeli. Tekeli was actually inspired to write this piece by touring the Sydney Opera House. And he saw these like different spaces in the opera house. Some of them were like filled with light, and then he saw like different corners in the opera house that were like very dark, and it just made him think about like good versus evil, and that's how he kind of came up with the theme of sacred and profane. So throughout the piece, you'll hear different representations of good and evil. The piece starts with the angel from the title Angels in the Architectures, who is portrayed by the vocalist. And then throughout the piece, there's some fast sections which represent the darkness that kind of shut out the light for a little while, and then the light kind of always breaks back through in the slower music. But even at the ending, when the light finally seems like it's resolved, there's still some kind of darkness that lies underneath. We're very lucky to be joined by our vocalist, Paulette Mathis, who is a music education and voice student from Towson University. And I just want to also compliment the band because this piece is not an easy undertaking, especially only doing it in 3 rehearsals, and they've done a really wonderful job. So this is Angels in the Architecture by Frank Tekeli. helped us get set up and got our percussion in, did all of the setup and all kinds of wonderful things, and basically working the sound and lights and all of those things. So big shout out to them. We also want to thank the chair of our music department at Montgomery College, Alvin Trask, the dean of the College of Arts at Montgomery College, Brent Trezza, and the chair, or the lead of the Montgomery College Community Arts, which is John Dino. Yeah, and that's it. So our last piece is called Dance Live Week. There's really no program to it. It's just another word for diabolic dance. So we